On obituaries involving death by overdose or suicide, the cause of death is often listed as something natural. Died in their sleep, had a stroke or a heart attack, but that's an unnatural way of getting there. The root cause of those scenarios are often related to mental health, and people look for to find roundabout ways of describing the situation due to the stigma that has been attached to the whole topic. Mental illness is simply viewed as shameful or moral failings, and I'm here to help extinguish the flames of stigma. Hi, my name is Eric, and welcome back to Unnaturally Dying of Natural Causes. What I would like to do on this show is multifaceted. I'm going to discuss my journey with mental illness, homelessness, and the criminal justice system, and point out situations where I went wrong and how we can all learn from my mistakes. 2, discuss how mental illness, homelessness, and the criminal justice system, or as it will be referred to here, the big three, intersect with each other and the ways it impacts society, and then hopefully allowing us to get into some hard-hitting topics and get to the root of the problems to create a better community. Number 3, bring light to people who I'd like to call the heroes of mental health history. Those heroes include people and patients who gave pretty much everything. People that have suffered at the hands of the system and fought back against it so that we don't have to. And then additionally, people like doctors or social figures and families of patients who made concerted efforts to improve the conditions for people dealing with the mental health system, homelessness, and the criminal justice system through either social campaigns or passing legislation. It's impossible for me to see these big three as unrelated, just as I did. Many people who deal with mental health or substance abuse issues will wind up will wind up dealing with homelessness and then possibly incarcerated as well. Now, roughly 20% of Americans, or just below 60 million people, have a diagnosable mental illness. Over 770,000 people are homeless on any given night. And we got 1.8 million people incarcerated in the correctional facilities across the country. That does not include the most recent detention numbers that are including and escalated rate of that. But those correctional facilities across the country include federal, state, local, and tribal jails, and these numbers also don't include the military justice system. They've got their own thing. Now, so again, those are some thoughts. So those are some daunting stats, but let's start with the basics. What even is mental illness? The National Institute of Health defines mental illness as many different conditions that vary in degree of severity, ranging from mild to moderate to severe. 2 broad categories can be used to describe these conditions: any mental illness, AMI, and serious mental illness, or SMI. AMI encompasses all recognized mental illnesses, and SMI is a smaller and more severe subset of AMI. Additional information on mental illnesses can be found on the National Institute of Mental Health health topics page, and I'll put the link in the show notes. Now, getting back to some numbers, so we get 28.2% of people with mental illness report that they tried to get treatment but were unable to get it. And it is suggested that around 50% of those people receive zero treatment. So I looked into facilities and stuff like that and try to figure out what are the exact numbers, and the exact number of facilities varies depending on the study and the metrics that they use there. But I did try to narrow the number down, as it seems there are similar metrics between these different studies, but it turns out to be around 12 to 14,000. Now, one distinct difference that I noticed was whether the study was counting facilities as to mean the overall facilities, or just individual beds. Now we'll get into more detail in the future, but just know that whatever the number is, we do not have enough facilities. Just as there are food deserts, there are healthcare deserts. Just as there are long waits for physical health care, there are long waits for mental health care. Now, thankfully telehealth has become like a thing, and that's able to help like bridge the gaping holes that we have in our system. But like the lack of available facilities or clinics, what have you, would be why roughly 50% of Americans do not receive the mental health care that they need. Um, Now, I've been to quite a few mental health facilities, and there's definitely like a wide range as far as like the quality of care standards go. Now, some places were essentially great to be at, and some of those other places were very questionable, and often had like questionable connections. That'll be a future episode, but staffing at all of the places, it usually makes or breaks the deal. Um, and so we were talking about homelessness, right? So of those 770,000 homeless people, roughly two-thirds of them have a mental illness. And it's estimated that around 37% of incarcerated people have mental illness. So, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot more people that may be needing help than there is the help to go around. And you heard that correct. This lack of adequate access to and stigma involved with seeking mental health treatment has like really far reaching effects. So those were some basic stats on where we see on where we stand today. And it all seems really bad, and it is. However, when it comes to like mental health care, things are better than they have ever been. We definitely truly have a long way to go, but to like understand where we are, we kind of need to understand how we got here. So, if we were to look back in time to try to find like what we would recognize as a mental health facility, we need to go all the way back to the early 900s in Baghdad. So by all accounts that I found, this is where the very first psych ward was established. Now, the beliefs at the time with doctors and whatnot were that mind and body were two different things, thinking that the mind was not like subject to what they call mechanical laws, and basically assessing that mental ailments were the work of demons or, goblins, something spiritual, something like, supernatural, demonic possession kind of deal. So in Baghdad, a local doctor had began to make his mark in the world, catching the attention of the area's leaders. Now this gentleman's name was Muhammad ibn Zachariah al-Razi. And he was not only a doctor, but he was a philosopher as well. And he really disagreed with the belief that the mind and body were two separate entities. And so he was striving to get the thought that a sound mind and a sound body theory to catch on, which basically means that he saw mental illness as a medical problem. So Dr. Arazi used the pull that he had, to create the first psychiatric hospital. He would later, he would go on to run it with the patient's well-being as, the most important component, kind of, like it should be, instead of it just being, large enough to house a lot of people. But if you're just chaining them to the wall, that's, you don't really need a ton of extra space, just body space. Now, the reputation that he had built for himself led to him being, appointed as the chief director of that soon-to-be-built Baghdad hospital. Um, and so basically the way that he chose, there's going to be a special segment on this gentleman coming soon, but the way that he found the spot that he was going to choose for the hospital to be built was he took pieces of meat and like drove around the city and left them out, and whichever piece of meat hadn't had the least amount of rot on it, that's where he would pick, because it was the least sick air kind of deal. All right, but let's dive back in. um So he is Dr. Al-Razi is one of the first known people to describe the idea of psychotherapy. He also used an early form of CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. He felt that there was a possibility that at least some of the people who had previously just been left to rot somewhere could be treated, rehabilitated, and returned to society to have like a healthy life going forward, kind of like how the facilities that I've been to run today, and maybe some of you guys have been to as well. But like, this whole idea of, hey, let's not just leave them to rot. Um, but unfortunately, despite all of the early evidence of how well people were responding to his ideas of treatment, things would not be done this way for a very long time. And even though irrefutable evidence was available that if you treat mental illness as a medical illness, there can be much better outcomes, mental illness would continue to be seen as some kind of moral failing or demonic possession for centuries to come. Now, as we make our way further in history towards like where we are today, um, the so-called treatment methods would include isolation, restraint, and other horrific means of addressing the issues. Um, and I mean, as somebody who has been rightfully restrained and rightfully, force medicated in these kinds of places, like, I mean, there is a time and a place for that, but that can't just be the only deal. And so like around the 1800s, 17 to 1800s, asylums became the norm for housing and hiding sick or, what would be considered by these families undesirable family members. So other than like trash, the patients were not treated in any true sense of the word. People who could not be cared for by their family or people whose family did not wish to care for or be attached to, um, they were put into asylums, places which were just essentially prisons for the mentally ill and developmentally disabled. And they were often just all kept together in just like these um, dirty prisons. There was seemingly no distinction made between the types of diagnosis, and as everyone was thrown into the same place, people chained to the walls and beds, and often denied any kind of freedom or autonomy. No treatment means there's just no treatment. On the whole, these places were terrible, overcrowded, understaffed, dirty. Many of the treatment centers, um, around the world, in the earlier days, they were operated by religious groups, and that's great that they were trying to help, but they were not of the impression they were dealing with a mental health issue or a medical issue. They were trying to exorcise the demons out of these people. But so as we get closer to like the 15 and 1700s, private and publicly funded places began to open up. So over here in the United States, the Quakers are credited with being the first group of people to provide care for the mentally ill. It was in 1752, and it was in the basement of a building at the Philadelphia Hospital. Dark rooms, shackles on the wall. And I mean, again, we're seeing that even though they are trying to help, the help is just essentially incarceration and isolation. There was no sense that they were dealing with a medical issue, in the slightest. And so then in that case, I mean, like, who was that kind of help really for? Now, we got Eastern State Hospital in Williamsburg, Virginia, opened in 1773. It is still operational today, and it was the first place to be opened specifically as a psychiatric care facility. It was also the first facility in the United States to be opened with taxpayer money. So the royal governor of the colony, Virginia, a gentleman by the name of Francis Farquhar, made many efforts to get funding for and construction of this facility. Now, sadly, he died before its completion, but his efforts to appeal to his fellow legislators, and the community at large did work. Um, so according to scholars, there are four stages of what they refer to as psychosis treatment throughout the history of mental health care. Number one, we got the moral treatment, which would be the early 1800s to 1890, which brought forth those freestanding asylums. What they call the next one is the mental hygiene movement, which would run from 1890 through World War II, or probably at least like the beginning, introducing the ideas of psychiatric hospitals and clinics. The third one is the community mental health reform period. We're talking like late World War II to the 1970s, and that one focused on opening community health centers. And then we've got the fourth and current one, the community support reform era, which they're saying runs from the late 1970s through the present, and that's where they started incorporating community-centered treatments as the best way to provide treatment. So, you know, the moral treatment, early 18 to 1890, um, the moral treatment began to spread like throughout the world and starting to reshape the way that society would treat and care for those with mental illness. It was a return to the ways of treatment Dr. Al-Razi had put forth back in the early 900s. And in England specifically, things were starting to change. Take for example, the 1831 opening of the Hanwell Asylum. This is where Sir William Charles Ellis, the superintendent of the facility, began to implement what is referred to as the Ellis system. And it was a system of treatment that was considered to be more humane course of treatment, as it was a combination of moral treatment, meaning like treating them as people, and therapeutic employment, meaning like maybe work on the farm that they had there. And he's a person we'll do a deeper dive in the future. That's already in the works, but seems like a pretty ahead of his time guy. But so English society at large became more aware of the increase in successful treatment at the asylum when in 1834, Ms. Harriet Martineau wrote an essay called The Hanwell Asylum for Tate's Edinburgh magazine. Now, Ms. Martineau's already large social platform with followers of her work, including the Queen. Like, she was at the Queen's coronation, Queen Victoria. She was at, Miss Martineau was at Queen Victoria's coronation. And so that social platform was able to help propel a change going forward. And changes began to take place and things were getting somewhat better. We will cover like in depth, like the stuff in between the 900s and where we are today, like as we go along, but just as like a base of understanding. That's sort of like a brief, broad stroke overview of like, how do we get here? But we do need to fast forward to the late 1960s. So conditions still terrible. The way patients were dealt with was basically still barbaric. There's rampant abuse and neglect was commonplace. As this was during what they call the community mental health reform period, the emerging belief was that a lot of people that were housed and treated in the like state-run facilities would be better served by living at home, like with family or in their own place, like a group homes kind of deal, seek treatment from the new idea of, these community healthcare centers. And but we gotta jump to 1967 when the issues of neglect and poor treatment of patients in the state facilities was finally starting to be addressed. Now let me introduce you to the Lanternman-Petrus Short Act. Beginning in 1960s in California under then Governor Ronald Reagan, it was an act that was aimed at curtailing the mass institutionalization, involuntary civil commitments, and the horrific abuse and neglect of the mentally ill and developmentally disabled. The goal was to set up community support centers for patients so they'd be able to go get the appropriate care while they're living at home. The state was supposed to be building group homes or acquiring group homes. And then the facilities that had been open, where a great, number of people were being abused and neglected, but that place would close. And sadly, those centers were never established. Those group homes were not built, leaving those patients, their families, caretakers, and by consequence, society at large, in limbo of what's going to happen to all these people. Now, I've worked with developmentally disabled people before. It was actually my first job, and I worked, all 4 years through high school on school breaks and summer vacation and after school program. But I worked there for 2 years after, and part of the training that employees are required to take involves watching this old expose, and I don't really remember the name of it, but it was basically on how things were and how they should never be again. They They were trying to make things better, the California government, I get that they were trying to make things better, or I'm hoping that that's what, to stop institutionalizing people against their will for longer than is necessary. There was no cap on like how long they could, that they were able to hold you. And they wanted to remove people from places where they were being abused and neglected. Those are great goals. However, I mean, because the appropriate measures were not taken, the goals were not met. You know, that's just sloppy. Like in theory, it's a great act, but the reality of its implementation was just not great. The fact that the community treatment centers were not built means that the patients should have been delayed in leaving. Like, okay, imagine if you will that you're bowling, but you know that you need to use bumpers like in order to be successful, or you know that you need to get a certain size ball, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, like you wouldn't start bowling and then be like, oh, okay, right, no, I need to use those things. I mean, like if you know that you need something, then you would set it up, ahead of time. And um, like if people would make the effort to set up the bumpers before they go bowling, why couldn't we have that same mindset when you're talking about releasing people? It's like if you do something like that for something as insignificant as bowling, why would when it's talking about releasing mentally ill people? And I mean, in this case, the bumpers that I'm talking about are those community treatment centers, the group homes. It's truly appalling to find out that in the first year after the bill was signed into law, the amount of mentally ill people going into the criminal justice system, it doubled. Right? I mean, the number doubled, and that most of those arrests could have been avoided if those community treatment centers had been up and running, if those group homes had been built. People who worked in the criminal justice system began referring to the constant stream of mentally ill people coming in and out of the jails as those who were, quote, serving a life sentence on the installment plan. And I mean, I've heard that. It's a funny way to phrase this situation, but it is unfortunately basically true. With like no services or inadequate services available for these people, no direction, things just got messed up. And I mean, I'm not living during the 1970s. I'm alive now, clearly, right? At least I think so. But yeah, but I mean, like that happened for me. I just didn't know I had so many issues that so I just wound up in and out of jail and in and out of like sober houses, detoxes, um, residential treatment programs, things like that. But since a lot of those people knew nothing other than the structure that the programs and institutions had provided them, and now they're just finding themselves with unfettered access to all of the potential downfalls that may have messed them up in the first place, but and no access to reasonable treatment. These folks began to decompensate, which is a loss of stability as a result of lack of treatment or failure to maintain the treatment. Now, these decompensations led to people using drugs and just generally running amok, letting the best of their worst ideas and thoughts win, which led to them getting arrested. A lot of people were probably not able to get their medications because if they had nowhere to live, then it's kind of hard to keep track of a lot of stuff if you're living out of a backpack. And, yeah, when you're living out of a backpack or a bag, it can be pretty difficult to, um, have a lot of stuff. You really do need to think minimalistically. Um, but a lot of those people that were getting arrested, the offenses were often for, what they call low level offenses, meaning that the length of their sentence essentially would get them around 6 months at a time. And I mean, I think this varies probably state to state, but often a 6 month sentence would mean that the individuals would serve around 4.5 months, and then, with the good time taken into account. And through through my travels through the various, jails in Florida and up here, I've personally met several people who, that's what they would do. It's it's sad, but I mean, it's a place that you can be during you can do stuff, you can work out, you get fed 3 times a day. The food is generally fucking disgusting, but I mean, for people who have no other options, I mean, um, I don't fault people for making the best choice that they can in a bad situation, as long as it doesn't, like hurt other people and whatever. And unfortunate reality is that for a lot of the people that were released by the result of the bill back in the, 60s and 70s, those institutions and the structure it provided was the best thing for them. Now, instead of addressing the problem and removing like the staff that were abusing the patients and fixing the conditions within the system, you know, um, the answer that the state came up with was that, you know what, no, we're just going to shut it down. Forget it. We're just going to shut it all down, and there's no need to like rethink any of this. And, we already have all of these facilities that these people are living at. Why don't we like figure something out immediately? You can get students that are in school going to get these degrees, have them come work. I mean, listen, I didn't go to college. I'm just a guy. But Yeah, but the answer that the state came up with was to just shut the whole thing down. Now, I want to reiterate that I feel that the goal was great, but the implementation and the execution was just abysmal. The act and its consequences were a proving ground for how to grow the prison population. That's for sure, and the aftermath is still palpable today. They created laws against homelessness at the same time they created a bunch of homeless people. We have money for foreign aid and money for bigger and badder instruments of death, which I don't know. Listen, the instruments of death, not great. We could definitely fix a lot of the problems that are affecting the people of our country um, by taking a great, maybe like an 18th of the military budget and putting them into these different programs. Um, I mean, we should be helping other people, but where I'm going with this is that if we ask the government to spend money on helping to make people's lives materially better here in this country, nope, sorry, there's no money. National security. Oh, hate your neighbor. Oh, hate yourself and buy this and buy that or whatever. But yeah, there's just no money for that. Listen, if the end result of your congressional act is that the people that you are alleging to be helping wind up homeless with no access to treatment of any kind, don't have a place for them to go during the day because you closed the places they already were, and you're then also passing legislation that criminalizes homelessness, criminalizes things like what they call loitering in a public park sometimes. Um, if you just wind up arresting the people that you claim to be helping, that's either a failed bill or it's a deliberate act that then fed the growing roster of people forced into prison labor. Um, Now, listen, I'm going to just say this. I think that prison labor is modern day slavery. Um, Specifically, when we have a crime bill that was introduced back in the 1990s, referring to people as super predators and all this kind of crazy horse shit. Um, it's a modern form of slavery. If you are criminalizing certain things, and then I mean, it's just um, the people with power always find a way to win. But we just, like, I truly wish for us all to understand that, like, we are in this together. We need to, and there's a lot of people that are having mental health struggles, and we're just not doing enough to help out in that battle. While we are also allowing for people to be homeless, incarcerated because they have no place to go, we're not spending money on helping people. We're just criminalizing further and further acts. Um, and then the additional new stuff about we're just rounding people up is fucking insane. I don't support that at all. Um, and but that's we can't control or fix what the hell is happening all around us. But I mean, I think that we can fix ourselves first and foremost. We can try to build a stronger community wherever you live. Like, go talk to a neighbor. I don't know, like we just instead of watching TV all the time and letting the news tell you what to be mad about, like, and how scary all of these things, like, go outside. And if that really is your reality, that there's, I don't know, roving hordes of people running across your front yard or whatever the fuck, like, then I mean, I can't speak to that because that's never been my experience. But I've lived in California, Florida, New York, and Massachusetts, and all I have ever seen is just people that look so miserable. And then I looked in the mirror and I was miserable. And it's this whole mental health, homelessness, and criminal justice. It's just one big circle that we're allowing for our fellow humans to be running. And I mean, if we truly want a better society, we have to make people's lives better. And we're all in this together, you know? Um, and we have no control over the past, but our futures are in our hands, and it's up to us to make the most out of the time we are granted. We must find the motivation to continuously move forward towards wellness, utilizing local resources and our community here to keep our heads on as straight as possible. Helping others is a huge component of getting and staying well. However, we must only be helping others as far as our wellness will allow us. If helping others comes at the expense of our own well-being, then we are ultimately netting zero positives. Individually, we are stronger when we have well-established, healthy boundaries. And the healthier we are as individuals, then the healthier our society will become. Just know that you are loved and we need you here. And please reach out for help if you need it. Remember, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have a problem, but it's not okay to have a problem and ignore it. Let's go ahead, buckle up, and make our future ours. Thanks for watching. You can catch you can find who to contact in an emergency notes in the show notes, but like a therapist, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. You could find all of these different local resources, national resources that will probably help link to your local resources. But stay well, and let's make our future our mofos. All right, have a beautiful night.